Tell you what, I'd pay good money to have your waistline, my friend. Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Sports Pro podcast. Slimmed down studio this week. Well, mostly literally, but I guess physically too. Josh Sim, welcome back to the Sports Pro studio. How are you?
Thanks, Tom. Good to be back as probably the most skinniest of editorial team members. So it probably fits the aesthetic we're going for.
Real humble brag from you there, Josh.
I don't know if that's a brag, to be honest. That's a backhanded compliment, maybe, if anything.
Well, I tell you what, I'd pay good money to have your waistline, my friend. Less about my mid-30s and more about the NBA, which we'll be mostly focusing on in part one of today's episode. And then in part two, we're going North American sports doubleheader. I'm speaking to the head of NFL UK, Henry Hodgson, about how the London games have been going so far this year and a little bit of reflection on some of Roger Goodell's comments ahead of the Bears game last weekend. But before we dive into that, the new NBA season is nearly upon us. There's only really one place to start with the NBA, and that's with its new media rights deals, which of course they don't kick in for this year. That's worth pointing out, I think. But they are going to shape, I think, the next. Well, they're definitely going to shape the next decade or so in the league. There was a really interesting piece published on the sportspromedia.com this week from our friends at Ampere Analysis, Jack Genovese, sort of analysing why it is the NBA was able to secure such a big jump up in its rights. Josh, if you wouldn't mind just giving me a kind of quick overview as to where we're at with the NBA rights, who's got what, how much is the total bill, all of that kind of thing.
Right, yeah. So the NBA's next broadcast deal, which kicks in 2025, we should say, not for this current season, saw ESPN retain a sizable chunk of the rights. They're going to be showing 80 regular season games, fewer games than they have under this soon-to-be expired contract. And that's because the NBA were keen to carve out a third package for a streamer, which is where Amazon Prime Video comes into the picture. They've come on board as a broadcaster. They'll show exclusively the knockout stages of the NBA Cup tournament, the in-season tournament that the NBA tried out last season. And amongst others, they'll also have playoff games, a conference series once every 2 years, and a Black Friday game. And I guess the other maybe shock was that NBC sort of leapfrogged Warner Brothers to take that sort of third package, the second linear package. And yeah, NBC will show games both on their linear channels and on their Peacock streaming service, including, I think, all the entirety of the All-Star weekend or just the All-Star game. So those are your three broadcasters: Warner Brothers, TNT. This is the final year they'll be showing the NBA, after which they will bow out after a sort of lengthy scramble to sort of try and keep their position. And yeah, but obviously all of this you won't see this all now, but definitely was the big off-season story.
Yeah, and it ends up with the NBA massively increasing its total rights fee. I think the final figure is something like 76 billion over the next 11 years. That's quite a contrast when you think about what the narrative is in the European market, where we're based, where the Premier League, I think it secured an increase, which is actually rare in European football, with its new rights deal, which again kicks in for next year, but it was only 3.5%. And in order to get that 3.5% increase in fee, they had to give up 35% more games, which they may have wanted to do anyway. I think that the general trend with European broadcast is to have more and more of your games on TV and holding back less and less. But still, nonetheless, a massive difference, really, when you think about the huge increase that the NBA has managed to get from what it earns at the moment to this new $76 billion deal. And similarly with the NFL, I mean, this was a couple of years ago now, but again, has managed to top out, I think, nearly 100 billion, or no more than 100 billion in total fees for for all of its rights, and that will probably sneak up a little bit with extra add-on deals to come and probably some new international contracts and things like that. This piece from Jack Genovese, really interesting, diving into the why it is that the NBA and others have managed to secure those deals. What did you pick out from that, Josh?
I think, well, it was a really interesting piece, and I think sort of one of the big takeaways is obviously that the NBA, the next contracts for the next 11 years, so that length of time probably incentivizes the broadcaster to spend more, given that they know that they're gonna have sort of. I mean, the NBA season goes for about 9-10 months a year, so you're going to lock that up in terms of content every single year. So that was probably was one of the things that stood out in terms of being like a major attractive factor as to why the NBA secured such a big return on their next rights deal, and also just the amounts that Amazon, I guess in this case, were willing to spend in terms of acquiring NBA rights, given, and I'm sure we'll touch onto this, the demographic of who supports the league, who's watching the league. So yeah, those were the two things that sort of stood out to me as to explaining how they've managed to do what most sports properties seemingly aren't able to do, and really grow their sort of media rights revenue at a pretty sizable proportion.
Yeah, what they managed to achieve is very, very impressive. But yeah, like you said, for me, it's not necessarily even that these are streaming services that are coming into the market. So Amazon being the main one, but you've also got Netflix showing a package of NFL games around Christmas. You've got Apple TV, obviously, with MLS and a little bit of MLB and stuff like that. But what they represent is new competition. And that's something that I think that, well, it's one of the areas where Europe has struggled. If you compare, like, say, France, for example, where Ligue 1 really tried to engineer some competition by taking away its rights from this long-term domestic broadcaster. This is pre-pandemic we're going back to here, but and awarding, and so taking away from the long-term broadcaster in Canal Plus and giving them to Media Pro. That collapsed to a number of different factors. But in Italy, you've seen the same thing with Serie A, moving away from long-time partner Sky Sports and onto DAZN. You've got DAZN trying to enter the picture in Germany, DAZN trying to enter the picture in Spain. There is competition here, but there doesn't seem to be the same level of competition as there is in the US, with the sort of big networks all scrambling to make deals with each other, and now facing new entrants in the likes of, I mean, mostly Amazon, but others too. It's definitely a sort of an interesting trend.
Just to touch on the point you mentioned as well, like this rights deal, obviously we talk about it as a domestic rights deal, but we know that these three broadcasters are going to hold NBA rights in other markets as well. So like NBC, obviously owned by Comcast, you're going to see Sky Sports in the UK, for example, show NBA games going forward as part of it. ESPN in Australia and New Zealand, I think, have also got the NBA rights long term because of sort of tied in as part of this overall deal. And Prime Video will also show some NBA games in various markets as well, part of it. So that probably helps as well, those broadcasters knowing that, you know, they're obviously getting US rights, but also they're getting rights for other markets they want to prioritize and strengthen. And going back to Jack's article, I think the age, and I guess we're moving on to sort of who is the NBA fan, just the youth of the NBA fan compared to, you know, typical fans of other leagues stands out, and explaining why, I guess, for broadcasters it's that audience that they want to hit, those future sports fans they want to sort of attract, and them seeing the NBA is that key way to tap into that demographic because of its appeal amongst these young people.
If you go and check this out, and you can probably still find this on the Sportsbro homepage, but it's a handy graph in there, and the NBA is the only one of the US major sports properties, so NFL, NBA, MLB, and NHL, where it has a higher a larger share of fan base in the 18 to 34 category than it does in the non 18 to 34 category. All of the other sports properties, even if it's slim, that is not the age group that they are targeting. Yeah, probably the final thing to pick out in that feature is the willingness of NBA fans to pay. Now, there's a survey run by Ampere in Q4 of 2023, which indicates that the NBA fan is willing to pay about $3 more, so $90 a month to watch all of their favourite sports, compared to $16 a month for fans of the NFL, NHL, and MLB. Now, $3 a month doesn't sound like a lot, but that's roughly about a fifth-ish, bit more, bit less, My maths isn't great, but again, just illustrates the sort of the unique nature of the NBA fan. Now, one of the other sort of major trends or storylines that we've been tracking at Sports Pro during the NBA off season. We've seen a number of these deals done, and it's not just NBA teams, but it's a shift away from the NBA amongst others, but the NBA in this case. So a shift away from being the NBA being a local product to becoming more of a national media product. And like, what do I mean by that? Well, basically, if your NBA team's share of revenue was previously disproportionately coming from local media deals. Now, we've documented quite a lot what's going in the regional sports network space, but those deals are not coming in at the same value anymore, if they're coming in at all. But what we have seen is a huge jump up in the value of the national media rights, to the point where it's maybe not making those local broadcast deals redundant, but they're making them much less important. Yeah, it means that NBA teams can be a bit more experimental in how they go about distributing their local games. It's less about making sure that they're on a pay TV local TV partner, and more about getting them into the living rooms and the screens of their fans that want to watch them. Increasingly, we're seeing NBA teams, or at least like sports groups, launch packages where you can access your NHL, NBA team, MLB team, 2 or 3 of those in a single OTT service package, maybe a single team package. But I think you could almost say that the NBA franchises are now leading the way when it comes to OTT, direct-to-consumer services. Josh, what do you think the impact of that shift will be for the NBA franchises in terms of how they reach their fans?
I think, and we've seen that there's been a fair number of teams that have cut ties with Diamond Sports Group, Bally Sports, for example, and prioritizing and going for this sort of over-the-air model. A lot of them seem to sort of emphasize the reach they get, and more so the revenue, which is obviously an interesting, we talk about sort of needing to get a balance of reach and revenue, and how that those sort of forces sort of come together. But with these NBA teams sort of going over the air, and they're clearly prioritizing reach in that sense, and that's quite interesting to see them. When in the press releases they list how many households they're going to reach with these games, and how many more households that the new model is going to achieve, rather than the previous RSN model. So I think, yeah, for sure, they're definitely among those sort of leading the charge in terms of realizing the cord cutting habit and people not watching games as much on cable. I guess they are really sort of thinking about sort of how their fans are consuming media and sport, and are prepared to sacrifice, at least in the short term, what would be an easy revenue stream, to sort of experiment with this and see if they can create a direct revenue stream of their own. They are definitely leading the way. And with the likes of, going back to sort of touching on the national media stuff, with the likes of Peacock showing games potentially in Prime Video, you're already going to have NBA fans looking at streaming and already turning their attention away from cable, or less so, rather. So I guess it makes sense to sort of, for some teams to sort of go double down on that, I guess, and make all those games available relatively accessibly on either free-to-air or some sort of, over-the-top platform.
There's a kind of twofold play here, isn't there? Like with the over-the-air, the theory is you increase your reach, and as you said, like, a lot of those press releases contain wordings around the amount of households they're going to get into, and that's the kind of stuff that then commercial teams within the franchises makes easier to sell those local sponsorship deals, because you can say, well, we know we're in X amount more homes than we used to be. But also they get the chance, and this is where the OTT element, I think, for me comes in, and why it's maybe the most interesting thing to track in the NBA will be how teams start to monetize those super fans that do sign up for their OTT products. Now, they're going to be very small numbers, really, like relatively. This will be the fan that wants to access all of the local games on their own device. They want to be able to stream them. They're going to be maybe signed up for the NBA national media packages, so they'll have access to ESPN. They'll maybe have access to Prime Video. They'll probably have access to Peacock. Yeah, it is that digitally native fan, but by owning that customer relationship and knowing that super fan, that does really create an interesting opportunity, I think, for the NBA franchises to go a little bit further. And this was sort of the big promise of OTT, like when people really started talking about it. And I remember when I first joined Sports Pro, it was still relatively fresh conversation, and now it's almost a bit within the industry. It's almost a little bit passé. But this is kind of the realization of that transition. It's literally taking away from pay TV, where you don't know the customer at all, you get given a check at the end of the season, to being able to go like, okay, well, we know we've got, let's take the Denver Nuggets, for example, who have done a deal this week with Tenure, which also allows them to launch their own OTT product. We know that Brian Smith in Denver, Colorado is a huge fan. He watches all of these games at this time. He likes this type of content. He's this many years old and has these other interests, and we can potentially show him adverts about this thing. And you can really break it down and get to know your fan very, very well quite quickly. And I think that in the coming years, we're really going to see an acceleration of the knowledge that NBA teams have about their fans from that side of it, which previously the broadcast side, they wouldn't have been able to get. They would have had a general idea, but they wouldn't have known the whole thing. Whereas now they're going to have a much more rounded picture of who their fans are. We're nearly at the halfway point of this, but I wanted to focus on a couple more NBA-related things. And just the first one I want to talk about was the NBA's international efforts. Covered this story, it's widely reported, of Adam Silver talking about the NBA wanting to go back into China. Of course, in 2019, it had that major incident with Daryl Morey, but that's not the only place that they want to go. And Josh, maybe if you could give us a bit of an overview of all of the NBA's kind of international efforts that are going on currently.
Yeah, I guess let's start with, you mentioned China. That's obviously a market that the NBA have sort of been involved with for a while. Obviously, you know, the emergence of Yao Ming in the mid 2000s sort of helped propel that, and I think several other sort of Chinese basketball stars then came over as well. And at one stage, I think there were games shown on CCTV in China, so the big Chinese public network. Before, as you mentioned, a couple of tweets from several team execs supporting anti-government protesters sort of brought relations down. So yeah, I'm sure that I think tensions seem to be now sort of resolving again. CCTV have showed a game in 2022, March 2022, 18 months after that tweet storm. And Yao Ming's obviously now, I think he was previously the president of the Chinese Basketball Association, has been heavily sort of pushing bringing teams back to play games in China. You have the Brooklyn Nets owner, Joe Tsai, as well, who's also said that the NBA is in a good place when it comes to dealing with China. So I'm sure, Adam Silver's comments probably stem from a growing confidence, I guess, within the organization that they're going to be able to return there. Moving where we are, I guess, in Europe, obviously, they've played games in London and then now in Paris. But I think the most interesting thing that emerged in March was that the NBA reportedly is looking at creating their own league, standalone league in Europe, which they apparently are in discussions with FIBA to do this, and EuroLeague as well, on how to grow the sport in Europe. And this could result in a new standalone competition. So I guess it would follow in the footsteps of what they've done in Africa. They've obviously established a league over there and done a lot of initiatives out in Africa. So I guess this would be part of the NBA's sort of goal to sort of help grow the sport of basketball. So yeah, whether that actually comes into fruition or not, time will tell. But it's an interesting thing that it's interesting to know that they're considering it. And then most recently, or at least around this time of year, they've done this over the last few seasons. They've played games in the Middle East, preseason games in Abu Dhabi. I think this year was the Celtics and Nuggets, which are the two teams that have last won NBA titles in recent seasons. So, says a lot that they're taking those two teams out to Abu Dhabi. And it appears the league sees the Middle East as a place where it can grow, and obviously, taking games there, but also holding events there as well. It'll be interesting to see whether that sort of leads to closer ties.
Yeah, the other one is Mexico, which a little bit like Paris and London before it. It's a sort of mini series held in Mexico City. I mean, it's a little bit more close to home, that one, but it sort of goes to show that the broad footprint what the NBA has been doing. And yeah, previously, obviously, it was in China, and obviously clearly wants to go back there. It's interesting, isn't it? You've got, at the moment, and we're about to hear Henry Hodgson talk about this, that is the NFL games in London. They've recently been expanded to Germany, Spain, they're going to as well, I think, Brazil, and there's talk of even taking games to Australia. So there really is a kind of battle for the big footprint. And this is something that those leagues really have an advantage on over the sort of main rivals in European football. Like the Premier League, for example, lots of people talk about it. I don't think it's actually realistic anytime soon of taking a game to the States. Obviously, La Liga has tried. I definitely wouldn't be countenanced in Germany by German fans. I can't see that happening in the slightest. Spain and Italy seem a little bit more open to it, but it's not the same. It's just not. It's not being done in the same level or even in the same kind of approach as we're seeing with the NBA. And the NBA's taking regular season games to different countries. The NFL obviously similar. They're flying in around all over the place. Long term, do you think it's going to end up being a little bit more like that suggestion of launching a European division for the NBA or an NBA branded European league? Do you think that will be the sort of where this goes?
I don't think in the immediate short term, or at least, I mean, I say short term. It's been rumored that the NBA are looking at expansion again, and Las Vegas and Seattle frequently come up as the cities most likely to get a team, and I'm sure there's a host of other US cities that would line up and jump at the chance of sort of getting a franchise. So I don't know if we'd get an NBA European division anytime soon. I wonder whether, and this goes back to 2022, the NBA have opened up team investment to sovereign wealth funds and pension funds. I wonder whether, we'll get more European investors coming in and sort of buying passive stakes of teams. And I wonder whether that will be more of a real, something that will happen first rather than sort of a European team division. No, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a European team going forward, but I know that you talk about the NFL and how, each teams, they only play in the weekends, right? So they have a whole week to sort of prepare, come over, do all the promotion activities and stuff. The NBA is like day after day, teams are playing once every 2 nights, sometimes once every 3 nights. It would be quite hard for me to sort of foresee them creating a team and then having to factor that all in their scheduling because of how many games they have to get through, unless they sort of cut back on their scheduling. So yeah, I don't foresee a European team anytime soon, but I wonder whether, given the amount of European players that are out there and thriving, like Nikola Jokic and Luka Doncic, I wonder whether there'll be someone who maybe owns a EuroLeague team, or maybe an investor from Europe who looks at sort of maybe acquiring or investing in an NBA team, and maybe that possibility becomes more of a live thing when we get there. But in terms of expansion, I feel Las Vegas and Seattle have been sort of calling out for a franchise for a while now, and I still feel that they are very much front of the queue. And then if it was to go international, then Mexico would probably be most likely, or maybe a second Canadian team. But yeah, I don't foresee a European team anytime soon.
Interesting stuff. Right. Well, that's sort of a bit of a prediction. But what I want from you now is a big, bold prediction for something that maybe is a bit of a long shot for the season, but you could see happening. Now, and I'm not talking about insert random rotation player wins MVP. I mean, what's gonna be the big surprise business story that we'll kick off about this year with the NBA?
I think it is connected. I think. Obviously, the Lakers played the iconic Staples Center, now the Crypto.com arena. I think that's what his name is. And I know, like, my colleague Sam Karp's written about sort of resurgence of crypto in sports. I wonder whether that naming rights deal someone else is gonna. And I have no sort of reason to think this. I have no, just for the record, I don't have any sort of inkling or whether that deal's under threat or whatever. But I feel maybe there could be a switch there, which is obviously one of the big iconic sports centers in the US. I wonder whether there'll be a naming rights change and someone else will take over. I have no reason to, I have no sort of inside information to go on this. I'm just taking a punt.
That's all I can ask, Josh. Well, my prediction is a little bit more. It's a little bit more broad. Mine will be that there is a decline in interest this year in the Commissioners' Cup. It launched, I think it's now maybe in its 2nd or 3rd edition. I've lost track. Yeah, it's relatively new. It enjoys pretty good ratings so far, but I think it's pretty clear that the players don't really seem to care about it too much. This is, of course, the mid-season trophy, which I don't think now has a new naming rights sponsor, who I think you mentioned at the top of the show, but I've completely forgotten. But I think that they haven't done enough around that competition for me to say why players should be interested in it, and that will also mean that therefore fans aren't interested in it if they know they're getting a lower quality of ball. Right, next up we'll hear from Henry Hodgson. So yeah, let's jump over to that interview. Sorry to interrupt your podcast. This is just a little nudge to talk about one of my favourite Sports Pro Plus features, and that is The Wire. Now, the Sports Pro Plus Wire is a fantastic tool for anyone wanting to keep up with all of the latest news in the sports industry. It's updated every single day by the hour, and it's a super feed of all of the news from across the industry, not just what we cover here on Sports Pro. You can access the Sports Pro Plus Wire as part of a Sports Pro Plus membership, and lucky you, podcast listeners right now can get 10% off a annual subscription using code podcast10 at checkout. That is code podcast10. That's for annual subscriptions only. Terms and conditions apply. Henry Hodgson, welcome to the Sports Pro podcast. And you've had 2 out of 3 of the NFL London games this year. How have they been going? Also, is it hard to kind of maintain the excitement around something when the NFL is pushing into different areas and doing new things? You're no longer the shiny new international toy on the block.
Thank you, Tom. Great to be on with you. Look, I mean, I think we've had 2 great games. I think we've obviously been really lucky with the quality of teams and quality of games that we had. And I think it's by every measure we would consider them to have been a success in terms of obviously tickets sold, the atmosphere on the day, the actual quality of the games themselves, and then lots of other measurables around viewership for those games, or just the amount of excitement really around it in terms of engagement in lots of different areas. So no, I think we're really happy with everything that's happened over the last 2 weekends at Tottenham, and obviously these are some of the biggest moments for us every year. I think to answer the second part of your question, I suppose it's certainly a challenge what you mentioned, but for me and really for the NFL team here, what we're really sort of reinforced heading into the games is, while this might be the 37th and 38th games in the history of the NFL playing in London over the last couple of weeks, for a lot of the people in the stadium, it's their first game. So we have to maintain the kind of the standards and the quality of every part of the experience that they have when they're at the stadium, and frankly, sort of over the course of the weekends as well, to make sure that we live up to, the expectations for the NFL wherever we are in the world. So I think, we challenge ourselves a lot to make sure that that's the case, regardless of whether we've been doing it for 17 years in this country or it was the first game in Brazil a few weeks ago. That's what we have to live up to.
Some quite interesting comments from Roger Goodell at that fan event before the Bears game on Sunday. I think quite a lot of people led on the maybe there'll be a Super Bowl outside of the US, but he was talking more about the sort of expansion of international games generally. I guess that's a testament to the work that you guys do and the work that goes on in Germany and Brazil and etc.
Absolutely. Look, I mean, I think we've said, and he's been very clear as well, both publicly and privately, that the UK's led the way on that front. We've been playing games here since 2007. This is a market really where we've sort of laid down the blueprint for how you play games, but then also how you capitalize on that and build it into a year-round business and a year-round presence in this market. And that's what we're looking for. It's not really just about, although those are going to get the headlines, it's not really just about playing games around the world. It's about putting roots down in every market. And I think we can successfully say that we've done that in the UK, and we continue to obviously build on that, certainly not resting on our laurels here. But that's the sort of blueprint then to try to do in all the other markets that the NFL is looking at entering.
Just taking on the Super Bowl comment, I'm guessing you guys would be pretty happy to stick your hand up and say we'd love to be the first one outside of the US.
Yeah, I think we would. I mean, I think we probably wouldn't be alone in sticking our hand up for that if there was a chance at the Super Bowl. But what the commissioner's response is the right one. It's never been in a city that doesn't have an NFL team in already. So I think at this stage it's probably unlikely, but you certainly wouldn't rule that out.
The sort of the next one I had on that is, I guess that a part of being an NFL base, something that the UK has as almost a small advantage over some of the other locations is the roots going a little bit deeper with things like the NFL Academy. How excited are you by the progress that that's been making in recent years?
Yeah, I think that's a really good example of where we are trying to put roots down. And, clearly, if we want to be a sport that is present, as I said, year round in the UK, one of the things that we need to build is local talent and pathways for young athletes in this market to become NFL players potentially. So I think the NFL Academy is a really important way for us to do that. It's how we're going to develop potentially a generation of British or just international players that make their way into the league. So I think on that front, it's incredibly important. And then I think it also plays a really critical role in our aim to engage a younger sort of 12 to 24-year-old demographic to become NFL fans. And I think what's really interesting about the NFL Academy when it comes to sort of the marketing aspect of it, and especially the social content that we produce around the NFL Academy, is that it engages a very different and a very young demographic to what we would see on our main accounts, because you're using those young athletes as sort of ambassadors for the program themselves.
I'm aware that there's a sort of NFL Academy like Chasing the Dream documentary series, but is there kind of hopes to push that perhaps onto some platforms? I mean, for example, I know that the NFL has that relationship with Netflix. Is that somewhere where you'd like to take that kind of content?
Yeah, it's certainly something we've talked about. Again, I don't want it to solely be about content. The answer is really it has to deliver from a football development and an educational standpoint and a character development standpoint. But I think more and more as we see some of these guys make their way into the NFL potentially, I would expect there'll be interest in that as well.
For sure. While we're talking about content and a different type of content, is the broadcast mix that we have in this country for showing NFL games. There's been a few different experimentations with different free-to-air partners, showing highlights packages. Some of it has worked, some of it hasn't. Are you satisfied with where we're at the moment in the broadcast picture? I know that the last ITV rights deal was, I think it might have been curtailed early. Where are you at with the rights picture over here?
Yeah, so I mean, no, it certainly wasn't curtailed early. Sky, ITV, Channel 5 are our three partners right now. Sky obviously is a pay TV partner for the bulk of games, especially Sunday evenings, in that great 6 p.m. to midnight window. ITV remain a rights holder for Super Bowl and for two of the London games. And then Channel 5 have rights to Monday Night Football on a weekly basis. So we like that mix. All of those deals expire after this season. So we are actively in the process of really, from a strategic standpoint, looking ourselves at what is the right mix. How do we reach the audience we want to? How do we increase the reach in totality for NFL games? And that's a sort of ongoing process at the moment that we want to really make sure that as we go forward, we're with the right partners to help the sport grow.
Obviously, you've got there's a slightly different setup for NFL Game Pass in the UK. Is that potentially going to be something that changes under that next rights deal?
Yeah, I think, honestly, everything is what is being looked at the moment as we go into that sort of process of trying to identify the right partnerships. And so that would certainly be a part of the mix there.
I guess with Sky, you've had that such long-running relationship and they seem to be pushing their coverage all of the time. There's been a slight trend in the European media market of some major rights holders falling out with their major broadcaster at a detriment to their coverage. Is keeping Sky something that you think of as very important to what you guys are doing with NFL UK?
Yeah, look, I think Sky's been a fantastic partner, and we have I think a really, really good relationship with them at this point. They obviously have a very engaged, sports avid audience that we want to be in front of. So, I think they're a really crucial part of the mix now, and we hope might be going forward as well. But as I say, as we need to look at the whole package rather than just sort of piece by piece, and understand the best place for the NFL to reach the audience at the scale that we want to.
In terms of like different types of rights as well, one of the major changes I think in recent years has been the International Home Marketing Areas program. I always get that the wrong way around when I come to talking about it. I can never remember which way around the IMHA goes. But how does that impact what you guys do on a sponsorship side? Has there been any sort of any areas where you bumped up against teams seeking deals versus what you were doing centrally as a sort of league organisation?
Yeah, it's a good question. We we know that there's probably a finite group of commercial partners that may be interested in working with the NFL. What I think we've done a really good job of, the commercial team here in the NFL UK office, is working very closely with the clubs on the deals that they're doing, making the right introductions to them, to our partners, and to other interested parties in this market. So I think through really good coordination and really good communication, we've managed to avoid stepping on each other's toes. But we were certainly aware from the start that might happen. And that's why we've tried to manage around it.
Taking a sort of broader step out and looking at all of the international offices, how closely do you collaborate with, say, the team in Germany on advising them in basically ensuring success of the NFL overseas? Because you guys obviously have a lot more experience than maybe some of the local offices, even if there are local offices in those markets. How does that setup work within sort of the NFL Europe under Brett Gosper?
Yeah, we work very closely with each other. I mean, me and my counterpart, Alexander Steinforth, work really closely. It helps that I've spent a bit of time in a previous role within the NFL focused on the NFL's business in Germany, so I have a bit of insight into that. But I think, across the board, whether it's marketing, events, commercial, we're kind of in lockstep. And there are certainly people out of this office in London, given that the Germany office based in Dusseldorf is slightly smaller. There are people in this office who provide, day-to-day support to the team in Germany as well, to help them in some areas that maybe they don't have the resources they would want to be able to do things.
Have you guys had any sort of lessons from them too that have come from moving into somewhere new that they may be able to try something new out that you hadn't done before and share that back?
Yeah, definitely, Tom. I think probably the biggest one, actually, going back to your questions around media, is they recently went through their own renewal process and sort of carried out a similar process to the one that I just described, sort of really taking a step back strategically about how you get the right mix, how you find potentially a free-to-air broadcaster that really wants to go in on the sport in lots of different ways, beyond just airing the games, but potentially producing some other programming around the sport. And so I think that's certainly been an area that we've looked at. Obviously, some commonalities in terms of people who worked on those deals, and some learnings that are being applied back into the process that we're going through now.
Okay. All right, Henry, I really appreciate your time, and thanks for doing this again.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye.
Cheers. Okay, lovely stuff. That's this week's pod. A reminder from me that you can now join the Sports Pro WhatsApp channel. We have that live. That is populated daily. You can find a lot of our latest updates on our content, on where you can find this podcast, even via that WhatsApp channel. If you just set Sports Pro in your WhatsApp channels, easy to do, free to access, and you will find us there. Josh, thank you very much for joining me. I hope you're tuned into the WhatsApp channel.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely in that WhatsApp channel, Tom. I'm looking forward to seeing more people in there. So
come join us. That's the message. Right, Josh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.